Funding for this program is provided by the National Institute of Justice.
Penitentiary punishment, 19 years, Texas Department of Corrections.
Hello, I'm James Wilson. A small number of criminals commit most of the serious crime in America. If these repeat offenders could be kept off the streets, crime would be significantly reduced. But police don't always concentrate their efforts on finding repeat offenders, and prosecutors don't always concentrate their efforts on convicting them. Police and prosecutors are often swamped with reports of new crimes, and so the repeat offender may slip through the net of routine law enforcement activity. Even if arrested, chances are the repeat offender will be released on bail. If he jumps bail, an arrest warrant is issued, but often the search ends there. During a recent year, there were 300,000 fugitive warrants outstanding in New York City alone. In 1982, a joint federal city task force targeted 300 of these fugitives for special investigation. Within 10 weeks, most were easily caught. Some were living at home. A few were arrested when they responded to a bogus letter offering a free trip to Atlantic City. In other American cities, police have formed special units to go after repeat offenders. One is the Repeat Offender Project, ROPE, in Washington, D.C.
I need you to update me on...
Okay, he's still wanted out on the warrants. There's 3 felony warrants.
Careful, it's supposed to be armed and dangerous.
Crime Solver said he's also wanted for armed robbery at 7-Eleven store.
And he had the 5 guns that we recovered, plus the machine gun for protection. You think he was harmed or what?
This is the one that picks somebody and adapts their identification?
That's right.
And buys cars in their name?
Exactly. He's driving a Mercedes. He rips off a bunch of people.
1,900 repeat offenders were identified by Washington, D.C.'s Repeat Offender Project, ROPE, in its first 2.5 years. The unit's 63 members operate out of one large room. Rarely in uniform, they neither look nor act like the everyday policemen on the block. Their assignment, to identify, arrest, and get off the street as many repeat offenders as possible.
We don't have a detective in a brown coat going out trying to find out who did this crime. We have an individual that we know is committing crimes.
The individuals do different types of crimes. They're not just going to do a burglary. If they need money, they're going to do a robbery, break into a car, so you can't, you have to target the individual instead of the crime itself.
If he's doing 5 offenses a week, he is a repeat offender. He just may not have been caught yet.
Included in the ROPE unit is a target committee. Its task, to identify active repeat offenders. The detectives run computer checks and search criminal records to find prior convictions and outstanding warrants. They talk to sources on the streets, see who's selling to the pawn shops. They monitor drug habits. When the background is complete and an individual has been identified as a repeat offender, the case is turned over to a ROPE squad.
All right, team, we picked up a new jacket today.
Are you guys going to be able to get in without them knowing?
No problem.
The ROPE unit will do anything within the law to catch a crook. They infiltrate, they use electronic surveillance, they go undercover, rely heavily on informants, and set up stings, situations that will tempt their target.
Get a bicycle, have the Durker get you a bicycle, a good one, to go by and sell it to them and tell them it's stolen. They can act like man and wife. They can act like family. They can act like anything at a given notice, so as to present an image that they're not police. We can move into a mode where we sell stolen property as if it's stolen, to determine their criminal intent. We can make them think that we're criminals and thus talk to us. And we have built-in safeguards. We record almost all of those conversations so that no one can say that we entrap that person.
These people are the hardcore drug addicts. These are the type places that they come. In this room here, So far this evening, I've seen 5 prior rope targets that happened to be in here when we hit it today.
Rope has arrested 1,500 individuals and recovered over $3 million worth of property in 2.5 years. 90% of the people were arrested on felony charges. But the Rope teams say they'll arrest repeat offenders for anything they can, no matter how minor, just to get them off the street.
These individuals out here are responsible for a large number of crimes. And if you take a half a dozen of them off the street, and you're saving 150 to 200 crimes a month. Easy.
One frustration for the Rope unit, the repeat offenders are just that. These detectives see the same faces over and over. They catch a repeat offender, see him right back on the street, and have to apprehend him once again.
My job is to arrest him and give the best possible case to the DA. And whatever the court system does, I have nothing to do with it. Right now, the court system is letting them out as fast as we can lock them up.
The Rope unit has been operating since May of 1982. I'm going to ask Inspector Edward Spurlock, who is the commander of the Rope unit, what happens to the persons he arrests. In a moment, I'll also be speaking with Peter Gilchrist, District Attorney of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Leslie Harris, former Director of the American Civil Liberties Union in the District of Columbia. But first, Inspector Spurlock, let me ask you about what happens to the people you arrest. What proportion are convicted? What proportion go to prison?
At times, the percentage of convictions rises to as much as 80%. Like for a 90-day period, it might go very high. But about 38% get some time, actually are found guilty and get some time. Now, that's hard to explain in a way because they are repeat offenders. A person out on parole for robbery has 4 years that he did not do. He's rearrested for some offense such as burglary or theft. They don't send him to trial. They simply revoke his parole. He goes back to jail to do the backup time. So the stats don't really tell you the true picture, but the percentage is certainly not high enough to please the police, obviously.
If the percentage of people going to prison from those you target for repeat offenders is relatively low, lower than you would like it to be, does that indicate that you're not targeting the right persons, that you're not building a strong enough case, or is the fault lie somewhere else in the criminal justice system?
Well, I think from a police standpoint, you can always do better each time. You can always present better cases. You try to present the best case you can. But I think the fault lies in the criminal justice system. It clearly does. Most of the cases, most of the problems have been identified, and they are not police problems.
Now, your unit is a special unit, 60 or so men. It works on these problems, but we have other detectives in the District of Columbia Police and patrol officers. How can you be sure that your unit is doing a better job than other officers in identifying and arresting repeat offenders?
Well, just recently, the Police Foundation conducted a study where they took the Rope personnel and did a study on their performance prior to coming to Rope, and then for 6 months while at Rope, and they found that 50% of the time we catch our targets, the normal police response catches their target about 5 or 6% of the time.
Why is that a big difference exist? And if it does exist, why don't we turn the entire police department into one large Rope unit?
Well, we have a different function. If we had only one response to crime, and that is we targeted the people, we probably wouldn't be very effective. The reason that a Rope unit is so effective is because we have these other people out there responding to the crime itself. First of all, the uniform's trying to prevent it, quick response in case they fail, assign it to a detective to try to find out who did that particular crime. Then a Rope unit comes along from the other end trying to put that particular individual that we know is a criminal, we know he's doing 4, 5, 6 crimes a week, to hook him up with the crime. It's an attack of the problem from a different direction.
I see. Wouldn't it be a good idea, though, to assign more detectives to the Rope unit? If detectives who follow up leads on new crimes are only solving 5% of them, and the Rope unit is solving 50% or more, why not transfer more personnel? Why, in fact, did we have to wait until May of 1982 to have a unit like Rope? What happened then?
Well, Chief Turner and the Mayor Barry, wanted to return 100 administrative people to the street. But they knew that if they divided those between the precincts and 3 tours of duty, it really wouldn't make any difference. So they solicited from several people, myself included, what we would do if they gave us 100 people and told us to affect crime as much as possible. I came up with the Repeat Offender Project.
So the key was having new personnel available to you that hadn't been assigned to the department before.
Well, they were in administrative positions.
But they were in administrative positions. They weren't on the streets.
Right. And going into the street function, the normal response, such as uniforms and detectives, it really wouldn't make that much difference. Maybe 1 or 2 men or women per district. So it really wouldn't make that much difference if you're talking hundreds of victims.
Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't make much difference to take 100 administrative personnel and spread them out through the precincts, doesn't that also argue for taking 100 persons who are now in the precincts and bringing them into an enlarged rope unit? Or would you lose something at that end if you took people away from it?
Well, I think there's a point of diminishing returns. See, there's a different objective. One, the rope objective is to get the repeat offender. The rope concept is simple in that you direct resources at your biggest problem. Those individuals. In the District of Columbia, and in May of '82, probably less than 20% of our criminals was doing more than 80% of our crimes. Mm-hmm. And that's still true today to a smaller degree.
I see. In Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, where Peter Gilchrist is the district attorney, they have a system for giving special attention to repeat offenders after they've been arrested. Such career criminal units exist in many places, but in Gilchrist's office, the method for identifying career criminals is especially elaborate. On this worksheet, each defendant is given a score, 5 or 10 points for being a heavy user of alcohol or drugs, 21 points for being young, more points for the kind of crimes he's committed, more points for having served time in prison. Any defendant who scores 55 points or more is regarded as a serious repeat offender, and the full resources of Gilchrist's office are used to make the strongest possible case against him. Under Gilchrist's system, a young offender who has been arrested several times for minor offenses and who is on drugs could be considered a more dangerous offender than an older person who has been arrested for a robbery and is not on drugs. Mr. Gilchrist, why did you decide to use this system of scoring offenders rather than some other? What were you trying to accomplish?
We're trying to find the active offender, the one who's out committing a high volume of crimes, and we're trying to take him out. We were finding that when we went to the older offender, that frequently we found a man who was burned out. There's a very strong correlation between activity and age. Even though I hate to admit it, I'm now over the hill as far as...
You would not make a successful criminal at your age.
That's right. The younger man is the one who usually is committing crimes day in and day out, and that's the one we wanted to get.
Now, is there any hard evidence that supports the proposition that it makes more sense, if you want to reduce crime, to look at younger offenders rather than older ones?
Well, I think the research that we've seen and the experience that we've had, we can take youthful offenders that may be stealing automobile after automobile, breaking into residence after residence. They've just got a high energy level. And I think it's borne out not only in the criminal area, but you see insurance rates on automobiles decrease with the older driver, and I think there are a number of analogies.
Now, when you identify the serious repeat offender, the career criminal, by your scoring system, what do you do that's different from what you would do with an ordinary offender?
We give the district attorney, the assistant who's handling that case, some pretty specific guidelines on what we would want them to do. A DA can only try so many cases, and what we'd like is for those cases to be focused in to the high rate offender. So more resources are dedicated to the serious offender. If we can only try certain cases, we want to make sure that the ones that we're trying are the ones that are causing problems in the community.
Does that mean that you look for more evidence, that you are less willing to take a plea bargain? What exactly does it mean if you give these repeat offenders a full court press with these additional resources?
All of those things. We get supplemental police investigation to shore up the cases. We have a no plea bargain policy. We expect a plea to the top count that the defendant is charged with, or we go to trial. Once we have obtained a guilty plea or a conviction before a jury, we then make the judge aware of all of the information we have about the history of the defendant and request a maximum sentence. We're looking to warehouse these people and lock them up for as long as we can.
What have been the results? What do these persons actually get as a sentence, as a consequence of this program that is different, if it's different at all, from what they would get if they went through the system in an ordinary way?
I think that may be the shortfall. Because we are working with younger offenders, we find a resistance by the judges to impose the long sentences on the young offenders. So this is a process that we're working on to educate the judiciary as to what perhaps their function may be with respect to identifying those people who ought to take the long sentences.
What about people in your own office? Does it create something of a morale problem if an assistant district attorney has somebody who's committed a very serious crime but doesn't qualify as a repeat offender, doesn't add up to 55 points? He wants to give a full court press to this person. Do you go in and say, well, look, we're going to treat this person, no matter how serious the crime, in an ordinary way. We're going to concentrate on our resources on this young man who's just been picked up for an auto theft because we believe he has a long record of activity. Does this create a problem in running the office?
No, I don't think the problem comes from pushing hard on the offender with the serious crime. The more difficult problem comes in going to the mat on the case that may not be as strong. The evidence may not be as good. It may not be as attractive from a prosecutor's point of view, but you know that the offender is virulent and going to be dangerous if you don't take him out. So it's not pushing hard on the glamorous case. The tough part is to take the case that's not glamorous and push it to the wall.
I see. Ms. Harris, you were once the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union in the Washington metropolitan area. What kinds of constitutional or civil liberties issues are raised by programs such as ROPE, where they're targeting offenders? They're not trying to solve a crime, they're trying to lock up an individual.
Well, I think there are a number, and let me say before I go into it that I think that Captain Spurlock has run a program with fewer problems than have happened around the country. I think your biggest problem is simply the question of surveillance. We do operate under a constitutional system that suggests we don't surveil people unless we have a reason, at least a reasonable suspicion that they're going to be engaged in criminal activity. I think there's some question as to whether, because of past involvement in criminal activity, whether we can really predict that these are the people who are involved. Now, the program in the District of Columbia at least purports to only use surveillance when there is a reasonable suspicion of crime. But I think there's an enormous temptation to use it as harassment, to use it as a way to keep letting people who are, at least at this point in their lives, private citizens, not currently serving a sentence, to essentially use this to kind of constantly be on them and say, you know, your rights are not restored, you are not a private citizen, and we're watching you all the time. And I think there are enormous constitutional questions. I think there are also some big problems involving entrapment. I mean, this program, you know, this is the stuff of TV cop shows. It's intriguing.
We're on one right now.
We are. We're on a TV cop show. It's the kind of thing that is exciting, but it also is very results-oriented. There would be very little reason to put the kind of resources and energy into this program if they weren't bringing people in for something. And I think that there's the problem of bringing people in for anything, traffic violations, anything to get them off the street. And also the question of stepping over that line, and when you are simply putting something out there to entice somebody, and stepping over that line to entrap them.
From what you know and what you've heard about the ROPE project in Washington, do you think it is operating in a reasonably constitutional way?
I think it is. I think early on there were some problems. There were some people in the program who pretty well stated fairly publicly that they ought to be able to use entrapment. It wasn't illegal. A cop couldn't get thrown in jail for it, and at least you were going to be dragging somebody in one more time and letting them know that you're watching them. I haven't seen those problems develop over time, and I think they're handled. But I think that there is an enormous desire to get people off the street. I mean, that's what these programs are about, and not all police departments are as sophisticated as the District of Columbia.
Let me just ask you about one term you've used. I think everybody listening to us has heard the word entrapment, but that's a term with a legal meaning.
Yeah.
Does that include a sting operation in which they operate a false fencing organization and people come in? What is the line that divides proper police procedure from entrapment, in your view?
Well, I think in my view, it's that when you are really encouraging somebody to commit a crime, providing them with the means when they really had no prior intention to do it. And it's a very fine line. I'm not one who thinks that it's very easy to distinguish at times.
The person has to be ready, willing, and able to
ready, willing, and able to commit the crime, and you just are out there in some way
supplying the opportunity.
Supplying an opportunity. But when they go undercover as criminals, which they sometimes do, and approach people, as they sometimes do, at some point they may be approaching somebody who really had maybe decided this is not what they were going to do, and they're just making it more and more enticing. They're telling them they've got whatever is necessary, and they'll supply X, Y, and Z, and then you're stepping over that line.
Inspector Spurlock, you've heard Ms. Harris say that your program seems to be operating in a proper manner, but there's a great temptation, a risk that zealous officers will step over the line. How do you guard against this? What checks do you have, or do your superiors have, to ensure that you're not engaging in entrapment or illegal surveillance?
Well, every case that we have that involves a potential entrapment case or claim, we discuss it with the United States Attorney. We take every chance that we can. We try to record all conversations, that of the police as well as the suspect, so that the court can evaluate the possibility of entrapment. But we have another program that I think is very successful, and that's an in-service training program where all of our people know the pitfalls of entrapment. Our objective would not be gained by making a case that would not stand the scrutiny of the court. We do not want a restrictive case in this area. The District of Columbia has a very progressive law. We don't want it reversed, so we're very careful. I think all police departments, to some degree, that are modern, would feel the same way.
Now, have there been any court cases involving persons you've arrested under the rope program in which the judge has said, you've stepped over the line, we're throwing out the evidence, we're throwing out the arrest because you violated this person's civil liberties? How often has that happened in rope cases?
It has never happened.
It has
in any
never
rope
happened,
case.
not in a single one.
No.
Mr. Gilchrist, a question that many viewers might have about your program would probably go something like this. Is it fair for me, 20 years old, I've been involved in drugs and alcohol, I've engaged in mischief, I've stolen some things from the supermarket, and I've stolen a few cars, to get the full force of your office directed at me, where next door, in the next cell, there's a 40-year-old man who has a much shorter record, isn't involved with drugs and alcohol, but he's been out there and he's committed 3 or 4 robberies, armed robberies. Now, you're going to prosecute him, but you're not going to give that case the full force of your office's attention. Is there a problem of fairness there that arises because you, in effect, are predicting the behavior of the young person in the future in a way that is different from what you predict the future behavior of the older person will be?
I think there is a problem. It seems to sort itself out, however, in that the older man with the prior record will pop up of his own accord, and everyone expects him to receive a more significant sentence. The difficulty seems to be with the younger offender who is creating the problem, that no one has really been willing so far to drag into court quickly, put before a judge with a good presentation, and demand that he be convicted of what he has in fact committed, and then to attempt to press forward and make all of that information available to the court for sentencing purposes.
What your program is trying to do, as I understand it, is to raise up to the level of criminal justice attention younger offenders who previously were given less attention, so that older and younger offenders are now treated in a more similar way, whereas in the past the younger offender was ignored perhaps on the grounds of his youth. Is that a fair summary?
He was a secondary candidate.
Secondary candidate.
And everyone wanted to give him a second chance. We know that prisons don't rehabilitate, and so there was a strong feeling that let's give him a suspended sentence, let's put him on probation, let's do everything we can to keep him out of prison. But I think what we had not realized was just how much crime these young people were committing, and the criminal justice system is pretty slow. It takes a while for a person to be convicted and go into prison, serve his time, and then come back out again. And so what was happening was that we were putting people on probation several times, giving them short sentences, and yet we could show, or we reached the point where we began to be able to show that the most active and the most dangerous were far younger than we had anticipated.
Now, does your office become involved with juvenile offenders? What is the youngest age at which your office has jurisdiction to put a person into a career criminal program for prosecution?
Once they reach the age of 16.
16.
Under North Carolina law, they become an adult. So
that's right. So you can handle anyone from 16 on up.
We actually handle the juvenile cases also, but in another level of court.
Ms. Harris, does the program in Charlotte strike you as raising any kinds of issues? The hypothetical case I suggested of giving attention to people on the basis of a prediction about their behavior, does that worry you?
Yeah, it does worry me, although I must say the program, to me, sort of has considerations on both sides. I think we're very concerned about the idea that you can predict dangerousness, which of course also applies to the other program, and that because of essentially a status, you know, coming up with a certain score in a test, that you might be treated differently. And I really have never seen any studies that suggest that you can predict dangerousness. On the other hand, prosecutors have a lot of discretion anyway. They could simply be deciding on a case-by-case basis to press more fully on almost any case. And
the scoring system might make more fair a system that is less fair now if discretion is totally unfettered.
That's right. I mean, you know, we also have a lot of concerns about prosecutorial discretion. So now you have, on the other hand, this interesting situation.
Thank you very much for joining me here, and thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. For Crime File, I'm James Wilson.